Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Episode 202, Spanish Italy in the early 1500s, the Kingdom of Naples.
E così ritorno su, lascio I colli nelle valli, tra due salici piangenti, io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
In the last chapter, we looked at two of the Spanish-controlled areas of Italy, Sardinia and Sicily, as we head round to catch everywhere up to the 1530s after rushing ahead a bit to see the foundation of the Duchy of Tuscany and follow the last of the specifically Italian part of the Italian wars between Spain and France and varying other contenders and coalitions. Speaking of the French, we have just come back from an amazing weekend in Paris, and I must say to the French people in general and the Parisians in particular, great job. It was my first time visiting as an adult, and I loved everything about it and could not get enough. What's more, the whole rude Parisians refusing to speak English must be a thing of the past or evil British propaganda. Everyone we met was friendly and helpful and tolerated our attempts at butchering the language before answering most of the time in English or in Italian. I'm sad to say that the only rude people we met the whole time were the Italians on the flight home. So, if anyone is in need of a house sitter in Paris, Mrs. A History of Italy and I are happy to make ourselves available. Anyway, I digress. What a shock, you may say. We are missing the last bit of Spanish Italy to catch up with, the Kingdom of Naples. We had left the kingdom in the early 1500s in the care of the man who had been a key element in securing it for their most Catholic Majesties Ferdinand and Isabella, the great Capitan Gonzalo de Córdoba. By 1505, Spanish control was almost complete in the areas we mentioned, and the same year the city of Naples paid homage to the king. The different treatment of Naples compared to the rest of the kingdom were a fixed element of Spanish rule. It would benefit from tax exemptions and special legal benefits, as well as fixed lower prices on goods such as bread. A Neapolitan citizen was to be tried in Naples, no matter where their supposed crime had been committed, and all of the royal offices were in the city. This meant that the nobility increasingly gravitated to it, making it more and more important. In this period, Naples would have been one of the top 5 largest cities in Europe, by some estimates behind only Venice and Paris. You see, there was a reason to mention Paris. Speaking of the nobility, there was the ever-delicate balance among that class and the merchant and professionals and the plebs. Like in Sicily, the nobility had managed to keep a lid on this whole nonsense of a new rising middle class, but the domination was not quite so absolute in the Kingdom of Naples. Even the popular classes had a bit of a say and a representative in the city, with concessions having been made by de Córdoba when he took control in 1504. Those concessions had been accompanied by a general lowering of tariffs, but it wasn't all just to be kind and good. In that same 1504, Gonzalo had asked for a donative, which was grudgingly accepted. The next time the Neapolitans had to dig into their pockets, it was King Ferdinand himself who had come to ask in 1507. This trip was also, in part, to check on his viceroy, who the king and queen felt was not being as forthcoming with the communications as they would have liked, and there were also nasty rumors flying around about de Córdoba getting big ideas about taking the Kingdom of Naples for himself. In the end, he did a decent job at managing things, and although he was removed and sent back to Spain, he was awarded the honors his illustrious reputation deserved. It was he who read the request of the Parliament of 1507 to the king, perceived as another odd sign. But in the end, an agreement was reached, with the king making some concessions and being granted a new donative of 300,000 ducats. The substitute to de Córdoba for what was now one of the most important positions in the whole Spanish kingdom was Juan of Aragon, Count of Ribagorza. He was flanked by a council of 3 Neapolitan noblemen whose names you are allowed to forget unless you are studying for an Italian history exam or are a big history nerd. They were Andrea Carafa, Count of San Severino, Giambattista Spinelli, Count of Cariati, and Ettore Pignatelli, Count of Monteleone, whom you might actually remember since he would later become Viceroy of Sicily. Ribagorza was then substituted, not immediately in 1509, by a big name at the time, Ramon de Cardona. This is rather confusing, at least for me, as I am easily confused. Just to clarify, the Gran Capitan who was packed off in 1507 was Gonzalo de Córdoba. The guy who came along in 1509 was de Cardona. We would have to go into a series of names and situations and titles to get everything neat and tidy and precise to get the exact picture of the rulers of the Kingdom of Naples in the following dozen or so years. At the same time, we would not be completely wrong by stating that Ramon de Cardona was the most influential man in the Kingdom of Naples between 1509 and 1522. This meant he also oversaw the transition in the kingdom between the reign of Ferdinand of Aragon, who, as we know, died in 1516, and his grandson, Charles V. If you're feeling really fussy, I've added a link in the show notes that gives you more detail about the situation of the governance of Naples in this and in other periods. Alternatively, if you are driving through the Emilia area, you can stop off in the library in the small town of Bibbiano in the province of Reggio Emilia, where you will find an exhaustive book on the Kingdom of Naples curated by historian Giuseppe Galasso. So De Cardona got down to business. Perhaps the most significant moment of his initial term was his participation as the supreme commander at the Battle of Ravenna in 1512, which takes us back to the whole League of Cambrai business, where everyone was teaming up and bullying Venice, who in turn had been bullying everyone else around. He lost that battle to the French general Gaston de Foix, who, as we know, ended up dying in that same battle, and thus taking the wind out of the French sails in what had been for them a positive moment in the Italian wars. We also mentioned that De Cardona oversaw the transaction to the reign of Charles V, keeping the death of King Ferdinand a secret for as long as possible. He managed to keep the balance with the continued centrifugal forces in the kingdom until his death in 1522. He was replaced by a chappie by the name of Charles de Lannoy, who tried to counter the influence of the barons by favouring the tradesmen and leveraging the electoral system and the teeny-tiny representation of the people. It was de Lannoy who oversaw the whole period of the Italian wars with the Battle of Pavia, the one in 1525 in which French King Francis himself was captured. It was after the release of young Frankie that everyone realised how powerful Charles V was becoming, and so the whole anti-imperial league business that would lead up to the sack of Rome kicked off. One thing I feel I didn't emphasize when we spoke about that was how close Naples actually went to falling to the French once again. It wouldn't have to be poor Viceroy Lannoy, with his convenient rhyming name and title, to deal with the worst of it, as he came down with a little bout of plague and died in 1527. Our buddy Ugo de Moncada, who had done a good job of managing things in Sicily, was called in, and it was he who had to deal with the invasion of the Marshal of France himself, Odet de Foix, Count of Lautrec. Viceroy Moncada's strategy was to focus his attention on defending the city of Naples. This was probably a good strategy, as many of the barons of the outlying areas of the kingdom welcomed the French with open arms, something the Spanish would remember. In the meantime, it meant that Lautrec had control of the harvest. As if that wasn't bad enough, a combined French and Genoese fleet, the one which had raided Sardinia, blockaded the Gulf of Naples. Meanwhile, people were leaving the city in droves, but that was actually a good thing, as it meant less mouths to feed. At this point, Moncada made a desperate attempt to sail out and break the blockade, but the only thing he managed to do was get himself killed. Ugo de Moncada, Viceroy of Sicily, Viceroy of Naples, was no more. This was a huge moral blow to the defenders, and soon all the non-essential people of the city were expelled. Things continued to go from bad to worse in the kingdom as well. What's more, the landsconnects with the Spanish imperials, you will remember that the Empire and Spanish Kingdom were all still under Charles V, were threatening to switch sides if they didn't get paid, and we know what damage a rogue army of landsconnects can do. At this point, you may be expecting some last-minute prophetic saving event, an army riding in from somewhere or similar. The reality, I'm sorry to say, was rather more boring, although not totally void of good bits. First of all, the French were not really 100% into going all Landsknecht on Rome style with Naples. It would not be an easy matter. Even if they managed to get into the city, there were not one, but 3 impressive fortresses, one on the sea, Castel dell'Ovo, one in the city, Castelnuovo, and one higher up on the Vomero Hill, Castel dell'Elmo. Incidentally, these fortresses still stand to this day, and you can go and visit them. At this point, the Genoese fleet, bobbing up and down in the bay, decided they were going to switch sides. After all, the now vast-reaching Spanish Empire was a lot better for business than the little French kingdom. It was also a Genoese guy who had helped discover the new bits of it. So that was the end of the blockade. July 1528 came along, and the defenders made 2 successful sorties out of the city to inflict some damage on the besiegers. Lautrec knew that he had to force the situation. If you are a long-term listener of the A History of Italy podcast, you will remember that going all the way back to the times of the Gothic War and the great Byzantine general Belisarius, there was a thing about Naples, sieges, and aqueducts. Now it was Lautrec who thought that he could precipitate the situation by destroying the Bolla aqueduct and flooding the surrounding swampy area, which was now even swampier. Add a little Neapolitan summer heat, and you've got yourself a little bout of plague. One of the victims of the plague? Odet de Foix, Count of Lautrec. Talk about hitting yourself on the foot with a hoe, as we say in Italian. Seeing the way the cookie was crumbling, the holdings that had passed to the French headed on back. Apparently, it was a procession with the holy image of the Madonna that then put an end to the plague, and the following year, peace was reached between Charles V, Francis I, the Pope, and Venice, who finally gave up the holdings they had along the coast of Puglia. When payback time came against the barons of the realm who had sided with the French, things didn't go quite as badly as some had feared. There were some executions, but mostly it was just confiscations of property. Then, when it came time for the Spanish imperial army to leave, and there would be less men on the ground to police the situation, a general amnesty was declared, and everyone could finally get back down to business. The threat had passed. I mentioned before that you can visit the 3 castles of Naples, and it makes for a really nice, albeit long and challenging walk. You can imagine you are disembarking from a fleet and start from the sea at Castel dell'Ovo. From there, to get to the centre, you can head along the coast and alternatively admire the views of the sea and Mount Vesuvius, seemingly resting but, as some fear, perhaps ready to be felt and heard again. Or you can head through the residential area that was once the early Greek settlement of Partenope, a name still used to refer to Naples by journalists looking to avoid repetition. From there, you head into the new Greek city, Nea Polis, Napoli, Naples, which you could therefore call Newtown, which is ironic because it really isn't. We head through Piazza del Plebiscito, past the Royal Palace, the impressive San Carlo Theatre, and the Umberto I Gallery to pop up in front of Castelnuovo, Newcastle, which is also known as the Maschio Angioino, where the insatiable Joanna II was supposed to have fed her lovers to her pet sea monster after having her way with them. Then we turn back to head to the funicular that will take us up to the Vomero Hill and the 3rd castle, Castel dell'Elmo, from where you can admire the series of uninterrupted roads that lead one into the next, creating the impressive view of the Spacca Napoli, the Napoli splitter. To get to the funicular station, you walk along one of the busiest of the bustling arteries of the city, where there's something going on almost everywhere, Via Toledo, as you pass the Spanish quarters to your left. You can already guess that the Spanish quarters, who got their name in the period we are talking about, were the areas along the city walls at the time where the Spanish troops were quartered. But what is this Toledo business? Well, it was in 1532 that one of the most influential and controversial viceroys of the Kingdom of Naples arrived, Pedro Álvarez de Toledo y Zúñiga. We'll have to leave him there for now. We need to head north, for way up there, in the very far reaches of what is today northern Italy, but in the 1500s it would certainly not have been, something is going on. Thank you very much for listening. A History of Italy is a Sentire Media podcast produced and hosted by me, Mike Corradi, and brought to you by my wonderful Patreon supporters, whom I'd like to thank starting from the third of the Margherita Hack and Galileo Galilei level. And they are Moppet King, M.S., Nonna, Paradise, Patrizia K, Robin S., Rocco B., Rod L., Russell F., Sandra P., Sean M., Shelby, Shelley, Simon O., Stephen M., Tap Dance Down Under, and Thomas C. And of course, we cannot forget the tippy-top Maria Montessori and Dante Alighieri level, Lisa K., Peter W., David L., David C., Sen, David A., Karen D., Bridget T., Dallas R., Joseph V., Stephen G., and Julian. If, like them, you'd like to have access to extra content, you can do so by going to ahistoryofitaly.com to the support page and clicking through to Patreon, or you can become a one-off donor on PayPal. Thank you very much if you decide to do so. Please also don't hesitate to get in touch if you have questions or considerations. hello@ahistoryofitaly.com or on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, arrivederci. General, the enemy has led yet another successful attack outside of their walls. They have killed many of our men. Morale is at its lowest ever.
No matter.
No matter?
Yes. No. I mean, that is not important. I have most cunning plan.
Really? Great!
Yes. We will destroy the Bolla Aqueduct.
Yes. Yeah, I suppose we'll have to at this point. I mean, desperate times. We'll have to rebuild it because we don't want the people to hate us that much. I suppose it's thirst is the only way out now.
First. Ha! That will be the least of their issues.
Really? It's kind of a big thing.
Well, I'm going to flood their precious swampy swamp and turn it into...
Are you, pausing for effect?
Yes, impressed.
No.
Not even a little?
No.
Can you just pretend a little?
Oh, go on then.
I'm going to turn it into...
What? What could you possibly turn it into? Oh, the suspense is killing me.
We don't need to be so sarcastic about it. Generals have feelings too, you know.
Oh, Dios míos. Can we just get on with the cunning plan?
Okay, but sure no fun at all. We're going to turn it into a swampier swamp.
Ah, so adding thousands of litres of water to a swamp will make it swampier. Cunning. That'll show 'em.
Yes, it will. 'Cause when you do something, people expect a change, and there will be no change, and they'll be like, whoa, why did they do that? What's going on? Is anything real anymore? Why are we here? Is there a god? Is it a man or perhaps a large vegetable? What does the fox say?
And then?
A full frontal assault on the main gate.
What?
Yes, and they'll still be like, oh no man, is this real? And we'll be like, no, you're imagining us. Just open the gate and go back to sleep.
Well, that's something.
Yes, now call the engineers and then ready the troops.
Yes, but...
What?
I think you just called the plague.
Oh, shh.